Hello, everyone, and welcome to Virtual Coffee Club of British Home Children by Joan Brewerton. My name is Alexis Jones, and I'm a Programs and Volunteer Coordinator at the Western Development Museum in Moose Jaw. I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. I am a fourth-generation European settler with distant Métis ancestry, and I'm humbled by the opportunity to live, work, and grow as a person on Treaty 4 territory, the homeland of the Métis. As a Programs and Volunteer Coordinator at the Western Development Museum, I would like to recognize the diversity of Indigenous people and continue to rebuild our relationship through reconciliation initiatives. Joan Brewerton, who will be our speaker today, studied Western Canadian history at the University of Saskatchewan, earning a master's degree. Her knowledge of the province's history led to a career at the Western Development Museum, culminating in her role as Chief Executive Officer for all 4 branches of the museum. Joan retired in 2016 and lives in North Battleford with her husband Gordon, and she has since written numerous history columns for newspapers around the province. And I will now pass it off to Joan.
Thank you very much, Alexis. It's an honor to be here to have coffee with so many people. And thank you to everyone who registered and who are here today. I just want to start off by saying I have a bit of a cough, and so hopefully it won't be too disruptive, but bear with me. I will start out by saying that this project began when I was doing some research on another project, and I came across a newspaper article in the Prince Albert Daily Herald about a horrible fire at an orphanage in Prince Albert, where 9 people died, including 7 young girls, little girls, and 2 nuns. And I wrote an article about that for the Herald, but then I wanted to find out more about this orphanage and who was there. And there's a one small book written about the history by one of the Sisters of Charity, and I'll talk a bit more about that. But she, the sister who wrote the history, had come across a list of 70 children from England that were sent over to the orphanage. And that really got me. And why were these 70 children sent between 1901 and 1907? And so then I started to look into it, and I learned so much. I really didn't know that much about British home children before I began this project. As many others will say, it's just not something that's taught in school. So I've become a volunteer with British Home Children Canada, and I've learned so much through that organization. And I highly recommend you visit their website, and I talk more about that later on as well. So Dave, I guess I'll go on to the first slide. And oh yes, thank you. That's good, Dave. So I'll go to the next one, Dave. Thanks to Dave Nagy for helping me out here. So first, I'd like to thank the Western Development Museum for inviting me to do this presentation. And the Prince Albert Daily Herald, I'd like to thank because they published all of these stories in their paper over a number of months. And Susan Hillman Brezo, Susan, you're here, and I'm really pleased. And if if I make any errors, you might be able to speak up at the end in the question and answer, Susan, and clarify anything that might come up. The Prince Albert Historical Society, including the archives there, has been invaluable. The Roman Catholic Diocese of Prince Albert, they have an archives that I've utilized. And as well, as I said, Home Children Canada, which you can go onto their website as well. So we'll go to the next one. Dave, we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So I thought, first of all, you might want to know a little bit about the background of British home children. You know, the first, and I got much of this information from Susan Brazeau, so thank you again, Susan. So Maria Rye, she was a philanthropist and member of the social reform movement in Britain, arrived from England with 67 girls and boys, 67 girls and 6 boys between the ages of 4 and 13, and she established our Western Home on Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario. And it was the first of what became known as receiving or distributing homes for thousands of British home children who arrived in Canada over the next 69 years. And that's where the term home children comes from. Next. So the child migration scheme began with Maria Rye's arrival in 1869, and it was supported financially by wealthy patrons, religious and social groups, and the governments of England, Scotland, Ireland, and Canada. So it was a combination of, you know, both church and state and some social reformers that allowed this scheme to happen. And in the end, over 50 organizations and individuals from the United Kingdom sent impoverished, orphaned, or abandoned children to Canada. Even shipping lines received a financial bonus for each child, and they sometimes carried as many as 300 children on the same ship. It was the beginning of what was to be known as the Child Migration Scheme, a program that sent an estimated 100,000 boys and girls between the ages of 2 and 18 years of age to Canada. Their average age was 12. The top photo here shows the HMS Bavarian, which was one of the many ships that British children sailed on to Canada. And the bottom photo shows Bernardo boys as they sight land, the site of the Promised Land. And that's from a British Bernardo Boys magazine, Ups and Downs, from 1902. Why did this scheme come about? Basically, it's because of the Industrial Revolution. And it brought a lot of people from rural areas into the cities where they became overcrowded and where children and their families were very poor. Many children ended up being neglected or abandoned or orphaned, and were often living on the streets. And before coming to Canada, many British home children had spent time in workhouses. They were institutions designed to provide shelter and mandatory work for people who were struggling to support themselves and their families. There were thousands, literally thousands, of workhouses across the United Kingdom in the late 1800s, sheltering tens of thousands of poor and destitute. I remember my grandparents saying, better be careful or you'll end up in the workhouse. So that legacy lasted into many generations. At the top, there's a picture of a woman with her 4 children preparing matchboxes that they would then take out onto the street to sell, to make some money to feed themselves. And the second one is a familiar story to many, Oliver Twist. Please, sir, I want some more. And that was inside a workhouse. So the majority of these impoverished children sent to Canada from England had been separated from their parents by those child rescue societies, and this included the Catholic Immigration Society that sponsored the shipment of the 70 British children to St. Patrick's Catholic Orphanage in Prince Albert between 1901 and 1907. Typically, struggling British parents, especially single mothers or those with large families, would agree to their children being taken into care and by rescue homes on a temporary basis It was never the intention of these parents that they would lose, custody of their children. Very few consented to their offspring being sent to Canada permanently. Children, usually between the ages of 3 and 14, were almost always sent abroad without their parents' knowledge or permission. And here's a photo of a mother and her children there. This is thank you, Dave. I got that. So this list here was the one that I found on Sister Monica Plant's book about the history of the orphanage. And it was sent to Prince Albert. They were sent to Prince Albert between 1901 and 1907, not 1904, as it says in the right-hand column there. I use this list as a starting point for my research into each child's story. Sister Monica Plant got this from Father Hudson's Society in Birmingham, England, and she included it as an appendix in her book, published in 1988 about the history of the orphanage. From that list, excuse me for a moment. From that list, I began to search on National Archives, Library and Archives Canada for ship's passenger lists, and they're available online. And they were an invaluable source of information about the British home children. This page here is from the sailing of the Bavarian, the ship I showed you earlier, in October 1903. And it shows the children's names, ages, and destinations by group, including 19 children on this list destined for Prince Albert. So that helped me a lot with the names, their ages, and when they were sent. Now, this is their destination of those children. They were sent to this orphanage in Prince Albert, and it had been a former convent. In 1899, an abandoned former convent of the Faithful Companion of Jesus, also known as St. Anne's Convent, was purchased by Bishop Albert Pascal, OMI, and converted into an orphanage. There were originally 7 local children, but after it officially opened on the 18th of April, 1900, the number of the children at the orphanage grew rapidly. There were always local children in the orphanage, along with the British home children. The Sisters of Providence came from France in 1901 to teach the children at St. Patrick's, but because they could not speak English, the children were required to speak French. It was not until 1906 that 3 English-speaking sisters, the Sisters of Charity, arrived from New Brunswick to teach the orphanage children. This proved to be challenging for a lot of the little ones who couldn't speak French, and the language barrier was the reason that the orphanage decided to bring the Sisters of Charity to teach in English. And this photo I got a lot of photos from the provincial archives, and this is one of them here in 1902. And this is boys, this is just the boys, and they're in uniforms, they're little middies or so on. And boys and girls were segregated at St. Patrick's. For example, the 4 Daly children who arrived in 1901 were separated. The 2 brothers, Daniel 11 and Joseph 10, were not allowed to see their 2 sisters, Evelyn 8 and Violet 7. The oldest boys at the back wore suits, while the younger boys wore 2 styles of midi-type uniforms. And this is from the Prince Albert Diocesan archives. One of the fellows that I found really interesting, one of the priests, I should say, that I found quite interesting was Brother Corby. I believe you pronounce it Corby, but someone can correct me, I guess. Anyway, he really felt it was important for the orphanage to be on a stable financial footing, and he had he had wanted to start a farm. So I'll talk about that for the next couple of slides. Here's a quote. The Catholic authorities would much like to see for Catholic immigrant boys at large in a large industrial farm on the same lines as the magnificent establishment that Father Paquet had succeeded in organizing at Duck Lake for the children, for the Indian children. Such a farm could receive lads at any age and would train and employ them until they were fit to take out homesteads of their own. And this was written in 1903 after Virginia Crawford visited Canada to have a look at what was going on here with the British home children. A driving force behind the growth and operation of the orphanage was Brother Edouard Marie Courby, 1865 to 1942. He had been assigned to work at the Indian Industrial School at Duck Lake between 1895 and 1900. During the winter of 1900-1901, Brother Courby contacted the authorities of the Catholic Immigration Society in England and was instrumental in bringing the 70 British children in 4 groups sent 1901, twice in 2 groups in 1903 and 1907. Life on the farm. Brother Courby believed that a farm would set St. Patrick's Orphanage on a self-sustaining financial footing. In 1903-04, he set up farming operations in the White Star district of Prince Albert. Once the boys from St. Patrick's finished their schooling at grade 8, Brother Courby had them work on the farm. After leaving the care of the orphanage, several boys obtained their own farmland under the homestead land grant system, with the assistance of Brother Courby. The farm operation did not yield the results Brother Courby had hoped for, and the enterprise was abandoned in 1911. Courby was devastated, severing his connection with the orphanage, and eventually returned in 1926, where he remained until he died at the age of 77 in February of 1942. And this is an illustration from the Catholic Child Immigration Society in 1904. Most of the children, I'll just, Dave, just for a second, I'll mention, most of the children that were sent from England were sent to receiving homes in Ontario, Maritimes, even on Vancouver Island over the years. But they were eventually sent to individual families, as was Anne of Green Gables. You were sent to a family to work as a domestic or as a farm hand, as a child laborer, essentially, and you were indentured. You were not paid until you were not allowed to leave until you were 18 years old. Anyway, I'll go on to the next one now, Dave. Thank you. So this is a picture of the orphanage. The original convent building is on the left, and the addition on the right. And in exchange for assuming responsibility for the children, St. Patrick's Orphanage was paid $11,000. And this money was used to add 2 wings to the orphanage building. This photo shows the original building on the left and the new boys' wing on the right, circa 1905, and it was a photo by William James from the Provincial Archives. And here's some boys playing outside the new addition in, again, a William James photo, 1905. And this photo shows the back of the orphanage. The original building is in the background. You can barely see the roof there, with the new boys' wing on the left and the new girls' wing on the right. And you can see some clothes drying posts and clotheslines in the foreground there, and another William James photo from 1905. So from here on in, I'm going to, this is really why I got into this in the first place, to tell the stories of these individual children, because so many of them, their stories have been forgotten, and only maybe even their families might not know, because there was such an element of shame to being a British home child. And that was because they were essentially referred to as gutter snakes. They were ashamed because they were poor. And so a lot of them kept it a secret from their families even. They never told their stories. They really kept it quiet that that this had happened to them, that they'd had to be separated from their families and sent to Canada. And so they never talked about it. So it's my hope that by telling these stories, that that they're the whole, not only the movement, the scheme of British home children, but also these individuals will be remembered. So I'll start out with the Edney brothers. This is George and Harold Edney. And this photo was sent to me. When I was doing my research, I went on Ancestry a lot and searched on there and found so much information. And one of the nice things about Ancestry is you can see people's family trees if they make them available, and you can contact them. So I contacted people, and one of them was Lloyd Edney, and he sent me this picture of his father and uncle. And you can imagine Lloyd is quite elderly now. Harold and George were shipped to St. Patrick's Orphanage from Liverpool on 7th of May, 1903, aboard the ship Tunisian. And this photo was taken just before their departure. So they look bright-eyed and sort of excited, maybe hopeful. George was just 13 and Harold was just 8. And according to Monica Plant's History of the Orphanage, when they arrived in Prince Albert, George immediately absconded and he ran away. And what happened to him after that was a mystery to me until I heard from Lloyd, who told me, he's 92 when he told me this, that his father ran away. But after his father ran away, he was soon found and returned to the orphanage and caned. Both boys became farmers after they left the orphanage. I should mention that all of these stories are available online on Substack under my name, Joan Brewerton, and they are much, much more fleshed out than what I'm presenting here today. The story of the Daly family, for example, I had to write in 2 parts because I was able to get in touch with, at the time she was 99, but her name is Michelle, and she invited me to her 100th birthday party, which was in Victoria, and I almost went. She's just a delight. But she told me the story of her father and his siblings, and some of the things that she interviewed her dad about his experiences, and some of what she told me was very enlightening. The 4 children, Daniel 11, Joseph 10, Evelyn 8, and Violet 7, arrived at Prince Albert from England in 1901. Daniel eventually secured a homestead in the Red Wing area of north of Prince Albert. Joseph enlisted in the Forestry Battalion during World War I. A lot of British home children enlisted in the First World War, mainly to get back to England and try and reconnect with their parents and their families. So there's actually on the British Children Home website, the Home Children Canada website, there's a whole index being created of British home children who enlisted in the First World War, and there's over 10,000 of them. So Joseph went to England as a forester to cut down trees to build railway lines and trenches and so on in the war, and he was at Windsor Castle, near Windsor Castle, cutting down trees. He eventually returned to PA to become a reporter for the Prince Albert Daily Herald, and then he became a postman. Evelyn took her vows at the Sisters of Charity and then left to marry. and Violet died of pneumonia in Winnipeg in 1916. So this is a family photo that Michelle shared with me. Eileen changed her name to Michelle, and that's the woman that was my source for this. And then she was 12 in this picture, Robert, Florina, and Joshua. And I'm really grateful to the Daly family for sharing this information. This is a really sad story, which I don't get into much here, but again, you can go on to my Substack to hear Lillian's very sad story. Lillian is on the right, and her sister Mary Elizabeth is on the left. And they spent their entire childhoods in various institutions. They were in and out of workhouses in England until 1903, when they came from Liverpool for Canada aboard the Bavarian with 18 other children. Mary married William Frank Roberts and Prince Albert. They farmed at Brierley, northwest of the city, and they had 3 children. Lillian was completely shattered, and hence shattered lives, by the institutional life. She struggled whenever she stepped out into the world. After the birth of their 3 sons, one who died of malnutrition at 5 months old, her husband, John Goffard, a farmer, committed her to the Brandon Mental Hospital in 1935, where she lived to the end of her life. So, I mean, her granddaughter, Valerie McIntyre, shared this with me, again, through connecting with her through ancestry. And Valerie went to the Brandon Mental Hospital to visit her grandmother on many occasions, and said she was just a lovely person, very happy, very, just a delight. But she couldn't, if she went to their home, she'd get agitated, and she would have to leave and go back to the mental hospital. She just really struggled outside of an institution. Very sad story. Sorry. There were twins that came to the orphanage, including the Heffernan twins. At least 11 who came to the orphanage served overseas during World War I, and 2 of them died in the field in France. Twin brothers John, or Jack Heffernan, and William Bill Heffernan were sent to St. Patrick's Catholic Orphanage in 1903. Both enlisted in the Canadian Army in 1915 at age 24. Jack was hit by a piece of shrapnel in his right knee, and his leg eventually had to be amputated. He went on to become a farmer near Clouston and raised a family of 6 children with his wife Lillian. Bill ran a butcher shop in PA and then moved to Winnipeg with his wife Mabel. He died in Winnipeg in November 1952, 10 days before the death of his twin brother Jack. And this is a picture of Jack in his World War I uniform, which was shared with me by Terence Heffernan. Hildreth Castling was shell-shocked during World War I. He lived in the orphanage from 1903 to 1914 and was one of the 24,029 casualties of battles of the Somme in 1916. Buried alive by a shell explosion, Castling sustained a gunshot wound to his face, which left him with a 3-inch scar extending from the left corner of his mouth across his cheek. Worse, he had classic symptoms of shell shock, now known as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Castling was no stranger to adversity. He had been in and out of the workhouse since he was a toddler. His father died in what was called at that time a lunatic asylum in 1899. And when his mother remarried in 1902, Hildreth, age 7, was sent to Canada in 1903. This happened often with, quite often, children who lost a parent. The surviving parent just didn't have the means to support their children. If they had, there was no such thing as childcare or daycares. And so they really struggled to raise their children on their own. So often that was what caused the families to split up. After returning from the war, Castling moved to Saskatoon in 1919, where he remained until 1942, working at various clubs, pool rooms, and billiard halls. He died in White Rock, BC in 1953 at age 57. And I got this photo from Ancestry. So several British home children from St. Patrick's Orphanage were sent out for service to Sinnet, Saskatchewan, an Irish colony just north of Lanigan, established by Father John Sinnet in 1906. Father Sinnet served as the rector of the Sacred Heart Cathedral in Prince Albert before founding the colony. At age 14, Margaret Fleming, up in the upper photo, was sent from St. Patrick's Orphanage to the Irish colony in 1914 to keep house for Father Sinnet. 2 years later, she married Edward Carroll, a farmer in the colony, who was 20 years her senior. Julia Fleming went from the orphanage to the Irish colony to the House of Defectives, which was a small mental hospital in Regina. I have no proof of this, but I suspect that she had a baby while she was at that institution in Regina. Elizabeth Stannard, in the lower photo, was sent to the colony and married Alan McEachern, 13 years older than she, and they had 8 children. Oh no, sorry, that's not a picture of her. The lower photo is of Eleanor Goulding, who was sent to work as a domestic for Father Sinnet at the colony at age 14. 4 years later, at age 18, she married Thomas Coughlin, who was 27 years her senior, and they had 7 children. Charles Burtonshaw. Private Charles Burtonshaw was returned to this country on demobilization and discharged in Regina. It appears that Private Burtonshaw was accompanied to Halifax by a woman other than his wife, and this woman was returned to England immediately at the man's expense. Quite the story. In 1916, while recovering from a gunshot wound in a British hospital, Burtonshaw married Elsie Mary Bowden, and they had 2 sons, and that's Elsie in the lower photo. In February 1919, he and Elsie M. Burtonshaw sailed for Canada, arriving in St. John's, New Brunswick on the 17th of February en route to Prince Albert. The Canadian military authorities quickly ascertained that the woman traveling with Burtonshaw was not Elsie, his legal wife, but a woman named Lila Mae Shipton. The real Mrs. Burtonshaw had arrived in Prince Albert in May 1919 and was then stranded there with her 2 sons, Charles and Alfred. The stress and trauma that Burtonshaw experienced, both as a British home child and as a soldier during World War I, likely contributed to his abandonment of his first wife, Elsie, and their sons at the end of the war. It appears, however, that he lived a stable life with Lila in England for the rest of his days. This is the only child that I've come across among the 70 that died while he was in the orphanage. Thomas Kerrigan died at age 9. Born in Surbiton, Surrey, England on March 1901, Thomas had difficulty in early childhood. His father was convicted of attempted murder in June 1903 and sentenced to 10 years in jail. Thomas's mother petitioned for divorce but never showed up in court. I found this in newspaper stories on British newspaper archives. She ended up handing all 4 of her children over to child rescue societies. Thomas spent some time in a workhouse before being sent to Canada in 1907. Michelle Johnston, the daughter of one of the Daly children, of Daniel Daly, told her father said her father told her a boy at the orphanage died due to abuse suffered at the hands of a very bad priest. The boy suffered to the point that he stopped eating. This is all from Michelle. So she learned this from her father. Take it for what you will. It is possible that the abused boy was Thomas Kerrigan, but I have no way of confirming this. I contacted eHealth Saskatchewan, the vital statistics branch, and they concluded that the boy's death was not registered with provincial authorities by the orphanage authorities. So the cause of his death at St. Patrick's Catholic Orphanage remains a mystery. And that's my photo of the cemetery. It's the old Catholic cemetery in Prince Albert. It's in disarray. I'm actually working on, well, it's a separate project, but I'm working on biographies of people buried in that cemetery. And there's a map at the lower end showing, the circle shows where Thomas's grave is. Anyway, I'll continue for now. The Mahoneys, Henry or Jim, and Henry, Catherine, and John Mahoney were born in the slums of the East End of London, England, in the late 1900s. In the late 1800s, that should be. Sorry, guys. On October 11th, 1902, all three Mahoney children were admitted to the Newingham Workhouse in London. From there, they were shipped to Prince Albert Orphanage in May 1903. Both Mahoney boys enlisted in the army during World War I. Jack was only 16, so he lied about his age. And both Jack and Jim were wounded several times during the war. Jack served as a trench runner, which is, I think there's a movie made about trench runners, but I can't think of the name of it right now. Unfortunately, I have not yet uncovered any information about Catherine other than she was living at St. Vincent Convent, St. John's, New Brunswick, during the years of the First World War. And this is a picture of Jack Mahoney with his wife Jean in 1937. I have some recommended reading on one of the slides here. So one is my Substack, which I've highlighted there, and then just some books that people might want to make a note of. Little Immigrants, The Forgotten Home Child. Empty Cradles is about the Australian experience, but a really interesting book. I use this as Roy Parker's book, Uprooted, as a resource. I really love that one.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Joan, for speaking. Thank you for Susan and your insights and everybody else who shared and had questions and everybody who contributed in the chat. We have our next virtual coffee club. Joan will be speaking again about small town Saskatchewan old hotels on February 22nd, Thursday at 10 a.m. So please register for that and come join us again. Thank you all so much. This was so interesting. I learned so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.